Hi, this is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and welcome to today's edition of the SEJ Marketing Think Tank with Christopher Hart and Corinne Schmid of ScribbleLive. Could you please say hello to our audience, and then I'll go ahead and take care of some housekeeping before we get started today.
Hello.
First.
Great. Well, it's good to have both of you here. Just to let everyone go ahead and log on. And Chris, just to let you know, I'm seeing, okay, now everything is fine on the PowerPoint side, so thank you. Today's SEJ Marketing Think Tank, we're working with our partner ScribbleLive on boosting your content reach and engagement. Why, where, when, and how. So as some of you may know, recently we've seen, or there's been some studies put out on actually decreased engagement in social media in terms of sharing content. And Christopher and Corinne will be going over a little bit of the story there and how to really craft your content for overall engagement. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and do some overall housekeeping here on GoTo. So again, welcome to our webinar today. As you see, you're all logged into GoTo webinar. You'll see a control panel with a questions box, poll information, and basic info about the webinar itself. We'll be launching 2 polls during the webinar to give you a chance to chime in and let Chris and Corinne know a little bit more about you. And then after they're done presenting today, we'll be doing a Q&A session. So feel free to type any questions that you have for the 2 of them into your question box in GoTo. And then I'll be going through those questions after the presentation's over. And we'll be going through a 20-minute or so Q&A and open conversation about the topic matter from the presentation today. And the official hashtag is hashtag SEJ Think Tank. After the presentation and the Q&A, we'll do a quick survey. That's pretty much it. I'll go ahead and let you kick off, Corinne and Chris, and get started. So thank you.
Great.
Hi, this is Chris and Corinne. I'm just going to adjust my GoTo so I could see the questions as they come in. I apologize for this clicking around a little bit. On today's agenda, we've obviously gone through some brief introductions, and we're going to talk about some items that are called content shock and the challenges that people are dealing with. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time throughout the presentation discussing how SEO plays into that and how we can amplify some of those engagements, as well as we've sprinkled in a few examples throughout the presentation. Corinne, did you have anything else?
That sounds great. No, I think you covered it.
Cool. Lauren, would you like me to jump to the first poll question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What best describes your role in the organization?
So yeah, if you could please take a moment and fill in the poll we just launched. It will give Chris and Corinne an idea of exactly where you fit internally, and they can craft the conversation and a little bit better for your needs. So number 1, overall marketing strategy. Number 2, SEO. Number 3, content creation. Number 4, social media. Or number 5, the always elusive other. It looks like 73% of you have chimed in right now, which is fantastic. I'm going to let, our goal is typically to get 85. So I'll go ahead and do a quick countdown. 5, 4, 3. Okay, we're at 83%. If you haven't voted, this is your final chance. 2, 1. Closing the poll at 85%. Here are the results. So it looks like overall marketing strategy is leading the pack. SEO, content creation, and then social media and other. Any thoughts there before you get started?
Yeah, quick question. Does my desktop show when you are given the poll?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's switch those displays.
But now we're back to PowerPoint.
How about this?
And
It's good.
no, you were better previously. Now you're in presenter mode.
Main screen. How's this?
Desktop. Good. Now you're good.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay. I'll hand back things over to you all.
So what was the final ruling on the question? I apologize.
38% overall marketing strategy, 21% SEO, 23% content creation, and then social media and other both tied with 8%.
So the top, that's really cool that overall marketing, SEO, and content strategy are that close together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it showed. I wonder preemptively. I wonder if how much of the audience is all on the same team, or if they're separate teams that are just doing a much better job communicating with each other as to their initiative. That maybe we could ask that question later on, or a follow-up to some degree. So, Corinne, do you want to take it off as we get into this topic we're going to call content shock?
Yes, and I'm sure all the content marketers can appreciate this one. This is effectively, and it's a term that Michael Schaefer came up with in 2014, effectively describing the state we're in now, where we're cranking out tons of content, and so much content that, in fact, there's so much that the average human is just simply unable to consume it. And so we have this delta of all of this information and content that we're producing. And as we can see, our content marketing budgets are continuing to rise. We have these huge content marketing budgets. And for me, for example, as a product marketer, I am expected to put out product-related content, whether that be data sheets and white papers, and then vertically specific content and information, and then making micro content. And so the budgets are increasing as we perceive these needs to be increasing that we think our buyers need, when in fact we don't necessarily have a strategy wrapped around this. And so what some of the information, the data is showing is that we're all increasing our content marketing budgets. We're all increasing the amount of content we're producing, but we don't necessarily have a sound strategy around it. But for those who do, we are seeing that it actually is showing some rewards. And so in the meantime, this brings us to this state where we have way too much content, and a lot of it is actually not even being consumed. So there's some information from Serious Decisions that suggests that to the effect of 60% of content is actually never even used, downloaded, or viewed. And that's really that delta between the content that a human can actually consume and the amount that we're producing. And so with that, it becomes a challenge in terms of, well, how are we going to produce the right content that engages our audiences and that is actually findable and leads them down the buyer journey that we want them to take?
Right. This is a great example of we as marketers in the SEO space, or individuals who have paid attention to Google at any level, have always been like, content is king, create more content, great content. And we've gone back and forth through creating briefs or little pieces of content to get lots of stuff to increase the publishing cycle, to Google liking long form content and paying attention to articles or information with more words and information on it. In a prior life at a B2B publishing company, we were able to do some serious damage to our ability to communicate with the user, because we were pushing out way too many news updates in a feed on pages whose source code was so stacked and so deep that Google was eliminating or using that data inside their SERP results, because 90% or 98% of the pages they were looking at were almost very much the same because of the code base. So we cleaned that up at one point and significantly accelerated the ability for fresh new content to be received by Google and presented. Also, to your point here, we have a customer story to this topic. Now, this is data from a LinkDex client where we analyzed and crawled their sites and then looked at some of their Google Analytic data and some of their Search Console data, which is what you have down there in the bottom screen there, we identified that there was, out of 5 potential pages that talked about a topic, 4 of them were almost never trafficked or never received page views organically. And through that analysis of information, we were able to either consolidate through 301 redirects, canonicalizations, or absolute removal of content from the site. And what occurred here is it shows that while organic impressions still stayed strong, clicks moved in a positive direction for pages that led to conversions, and click-through rates increased because the information users were seeing in the SERPs were very, very targeted at that point. That overall, that top chart you see, the e-commerce conversion rate, they went from a roughly 4-something% to an 8-something% in conversion rate, looking at existing lifetime clients, customers that came in organically that didn't just come to the site. So they were able to remove content ambiguity and get highly focused result sets and drive conversion rates, doubling them to some degree. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, have you had some of this occur elsewhere in your relationships?
Yes, you know, on the content strategy side of things, and we've been basically refurbishing a lot of past created content, especially with clients and companies that have invested previously in kind of taking the birdshot approach to multiple pieces of content that don't necessarily have a core nucleus attaching everything, to kind of reshuffling that from a 52 pickup style environment to more of a hierarchical structure. And the results have been great, and it's been good for businesses to see that they can get a return on that previous investment, where that tactic that was used previously was a little bit outdated, and by taking a strategic approach, more results. So seeing very similar numbers that match up with that graph that you're showing at the top of the screen.
Right, and that's good to know. And Corinne, some conversations you and I have been having on the side were, how do we take this just from, because you could do this very easy in an e-commerce site or an informational site of some sort, but when you're talking about a product or a brand, how do you product marketing get into this where the conversation or the content isn't just brand speak, that data is customer voice, right?
Right, and that's one of the big things that we're seeing as well as we get more into what we're now calling the content challenge, is that people are less interested, well, they haven't been interested in speeds and feeds for a long time. They want to know how you're going to solve a problem. But now we're seeing how the primary way that people are first engaging with content is on a mobile device. And that really changes the nature of sort of top of funnel and how you're going to drive awareness. And so definitely self-promoting advertisements, sponsor things. We've seen how Facebook backlash, where they had to change their algorithms so when you logged onto Facebook, you actually saw things from your friends and things you wanted to see, versus paid, which was becoming very frustrating. And so despite that, the number one thing people were engaging with is video. And so on a mobile device. And so we're seeing that there's a shift between having this small screen simplicity, which means you can't have big, long reams of copy and words and things on a single little screen, but you can have a really interesting video that actually is that top of funnel, that sort of that clickbait, for lack of a better word, that's actually going to drive them to convert and get them to the bigger screen, where you can actually then convert them to get their information. And that really requires taking a look at, you know, your content strategy from top of funnel, realizing, again, mobile devices are that first point of entry. You can't have a lot of copy. You need to engage with them in a very highly visual, mobile or live format that takes them through and gives them then something that they really desire looking for, that isn't this self-branding promotional piece, the self-serves the brand, but doesn't resonate with the buyer and with that audience. And so we're seeing more and more of that, where people are having much higher degrees of conversions when they have educational pieces that are sort of third-party research studies, or some form of data-driven, research-driven, or educational on the thought leadership side, versus these, self-promoting brand speak, and clearly just another, it's advertising effectively.
From a purely editorial POV, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing too, where we're seeing a lot of companies wanting to have their content marketing, they want to act more like publishers and telling more of that story and having more of a narrative along the buyer journey, versus just these one-off and micro pieces that are just simply, just as Lauren said, that 52 card pickup. Right.
So it's the shift that we've been seeing for a long time, where B2B publishers had this, I guess, these lockdown gates on creating well-written editorial content for users, by users, from their voice, right? And then they were able to sell advertisers through this closed circ solution, like, oh, we get to better buyers and whatnot. And inside B2B publishing back in the magazine days, they had advertorials, which were brands' best bet at creating an article that looked editorially driven and placed it in an editorial setting. Now in many instances, people are calling this like native content, native advertising, and really forward-thinking, good brands that are listening to their customers, engaging with them through all their channels, are creating content. Yes, you have to create some content about your product spec and whatnot, but your product spec is not the kind of thing that's going to get a person to your site from solving their question. That's going to be the thing they find after they know about the product that they have to get. So they're creating voice, tone, and content around how their audience sees them and how their audience uses their product in the real world. I'm sure if everybody goes out and speaks to their customers more frequently, they'll quickly realize, however you in your walled-in garden of your business think a product should or can be used, there's a million innovative cases out there that you haven't even considered that are amazing fodder for unique content, for use cases that give you an entire new conversation to have with a potential audience you didn't even know you could market to, just because somebody else is using your product in a way that you haven't considered. So there's a lot of opportunity there in getting that user content moving forward, which brings us into talking about the content reach and engagement. And many people move through solutions similar to how we loop through this linear position of, we must ideate, we must plan, we must create, we must distribute, and we must measure, right? All of this has to be said, encapsulated with, not just from my perspective, but from the perspective of the audience, so that you can increase the SEO and organic presence. Is that where you're seeing your world move a good bit, Corinne?
Oh, absolutely. And especially as I'm looking at ways to work on positioning and a value proposition, it's really important to know where the market is, what are buyers looking for, what are those key use cases and the problems that we're solving, and their behaviors as they go through and look for a solution that's going to help them solve a specific problem. So it's not just looking at your competitive sites, but it's actually, to your point, talking to these buyers and engaging with this audience to hear from them directly. But as it relates to them looking at what we're, search engine optimization and being able to understand what some of these key trends are and some of these key areas that we need to be looking at and including in the creation of the messaging and positioning, and some of those key messages that we want to articulate. Oh, my lights are going off in here. We need to really take a look at the search engine optimization elements of this, because those become key inputs into the content that needs to be created.
Exactly. And when we're in a world right now, like so I'm just gonna been doing this for 20-something years. I'm 47, so I'm old, than most people in this industry. But it was a huge, huge moment in time when laptops became the thing that were purchased more than desktops devices, right? And now we're in an equal paradigm of mobile devices are being purchased faster than laptop devices and definitely desktop devices. And the query trends from devices have already moved into, for a majority, many of the clients I work with have moved into this mobile first thing that you're looking at, and that Google is also talking about with changing how they're going to present their indexation. But this last stat, about 71% start a generic query. So they're looking for a product first, not you, right? And on top of that, Google has also told us that there's millions of queries that they see for the very first time every month, brand new, one-off. So this mobile moving, needing information when you want it, where you are, kind of destabilizes the position of a brand to say, I need to, build a foundation and create a fort, and this is where I'm going to be. You almost have to create an engagement with your audience to where you're always floating around, just getting ready to be called into the game, waiting for them to find you. You can't create a business presence or a business marketing agenda that's wrapped around, I'm going to state this, and people that need me are going to state my message. You need to state your message in a way so that when people are ready for you, they ask and you're found as they're asking for you, right? Yes, no? Okay. Silence is accepted.
Well, and that's very true, and especially as we're looking at more search terms on a mobile device, they're no longer being typed. They're actually it's an audio ask, and so it's more natural speech as well. And so there's that element that is really interesting for then how it impacts the result sets that we get as a marketer in terms of content creation and positioning and all the inputs, for sure.
So let's jump into some SEO trends that we've noticed that were talked about in regard to an article that was put up by Search Engine Journal, SEO Trends for 2018. And some of this we've already touched upon. And Lauren, please do feel free to jump in here, right? But we've talked a good bit about mobile first, and we just touched on voice search. I'm a big fan of schema and feature snippets and working to address this data in a way so that it's presented in a way in the SERP result that makes you look better than the other people in there. Like if your element is in the results that looks and feels and answers better and is presented in a nicer way, people are going to click on it. You're already ranked there. Why don't you rank there better? If you got an invite to the Academy Awards, you're going to show up with a really good outfit on. You're not just going to show up with, well, you might. Some people might, but I'm just saying, put your best foot forward, right?
This illustration is interesting too because I basically see this bottom row of circles being what's handled from a core technical perspective on the site side, right? And then the top being kind of that always important icing, so to speak. So for example, schema and featured snippets, like you said, those are the differentiators in the SERPs. Even if you're not ranking above the fold or number one or however you want to say it, the ability to include featured snippets and schema data around recipes, times that you're open, what kind of site you are, what kind of business you are, et cetera, can influence click-through percentage, and it's going to have benefit as a whole across the board. And it's not just Google now, right? So Bing is doing a lot more on the schema side of things and integrating a lot more into their index as well. And as we know, Bing has been taking a mobile first approach for a while too, right? So It's very interesting the way that you've laid this out. And, I would say when I was looking at the SEO Trends piece, it surprises me how many sites today, A, are not secure from an HTTPS SSL perspective, and then B, do not have structured data as part of their overall content and technical strategy, because it just leads to quicker, not necessarily quicker indexing, but quicker understanding of the content on the page. And it lets the individual know that they're going to find something that satisfies their search intent. That's kind of how I see schema and featured snippets. It's a preview of what they're going to find, and if that preview is good, as you know, trailers do work that way, Chris. If the trailer is good, then you're going to go see the movie, right? If the schema is fantastic, if the preview is fantastic, you're going to click to read for more. So yeah.
I have a case that I could talk about. I can't name the brand, but it's a client of mine that took the banking schema and started using it ahead of their competitors, and I've seen a 60% growth in their overall traffic as a result of pages that they've done schema on. They haven't seen tremendous changes in the ranking positions. They ranked very well already, and were highly competitive against their competitive set nationally and in a localized position. But the ability for them to create a better presentation has led to them getting more mileage out of the gas that they're putting in the tank, right? So they're taking their already valuable content and they're presenting it in a better engaging way that has enabled them to take a first position move past for their competitors. So all good stuff if you take a moment to look deep into that. Okay, and then we've seen the same trend year over year with SEO. Strong brands around this are always looking to create trust. If you move from that level of trust, you tend to lose your client on a certain level. Are there any other components you wanted to add in here from a brand marketer standpoint, Corinne?
Yeah, I think it's important that as well we see more and more, especially in the B2C market, more companies wanting to take back and reestablish trust with their audience, because depending just on search, depending just on the social, their ability for people to be, or their findability on things like Facebook and YouTube has actually hurt their brands. And so really thinking through the SEO strategy as part of this content creation is becoming increasingly important, because of the fact we live in an era of fake news now. And so these brands don't want to have their brand associated with something that's fake news or divisive or something that's awful, because it's really driving consumers away. And regardless of the intent of the brand, the perception of their brand being associated next to something like that, whether it's their fault or not, is hurting them overall. And so we're definitely going to see this pick up and be a bigger topic this year. I'm
glad you said it that way, because it's not just from content that's created that ranks organically. It's also an issue from an advertising ad purchase POV, right? You have, brands who, and we've seen this on YouTube a lot over the last year or so, where a brand's advertisement is somehow, some way matched up to a piece of content that a brand does not necessarily want to be associated with. So there are some big brand budgets and some big agency budgets that are pulling advertising dollars and flipping that money over into their own in-house content creation efforts, because they have better control over that messaging without worrying about it's hard enough to live your life without worrying about everybody else that's trying to mess you up, right? And suddenly you've got, what I'm saying, like suddenly you're doing a really good job building your brand, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to you, some other social platform puts your advertisement on a page that is not the kind of message you want your brand associated with.
Exactly. Well, and that's what Kevin or Keith Weed from Unilever called on Facebook and Google to clean out their online swamp, and that 2018 would be the year that social needed to reestablish trust with the consumer. So, you know, it really takes us over now to the opportunity for, you know, what can we do with all of this stuff that's happening? And so we all need to take a look at, we know we need to ideate and plan, and so we're going to create. But then how are we now going to distribute? And then sort of what's the opportunity for measurement and improving the performance given these circumstances? And so a lot of it goes back to original content. And so what we're seeing in terms of just getting back to, almost like back to content 101, in terms of really taking a look at authentic content, whether it's research driven or it's educational, that really isn't about you, but it's about your audience. And it's really serving the audience first and a problem that you're solving for them, and in a way that's helpful and less self-serving. I think that's one of the big things that we're going to be seeing a big trend for this year overall. Which
dovetails nicely. Look like we've actually planned it out pretty well. Brings us into our second poll question. Lauren, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Launching this right now. And what type of content are you looking to produce this year? So if you just take the time and pick one of the three. First, looking at static content, ebooks, white papers, blog posts, brochures. Second, visual, video, infographics, and lookbooks. And third, interactive, quizzes, live chats, different solution building tools. Looks like we've had about 50% of you vote thus far. I'll do my patented countdown, try to get up to at least a 70 to 75% level. So we're at 62, 5, 4, 3. This is your final chance. Go ahead and vote now. 2, 1. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share these results. And it looks like Chris and Corinne, we're leading towards the visual and static side of things with content planning.
Interesting.
I wonder if that is due to, and I'm going to put my dual screen thing back on so you don't see my messy desktop. I wonder if that is just due to the complexity of potentially making interactive elements, or people not understanding how, you know, how an interactive piece could be used to capture more micro information, you know, small pieces of data through the interaction, right? You know, we've all seen static ebooks and white papers and blog posts be used to generate traffic or identify new unique users and tag them, and hopefully people are doing some retargeting and, you know, bringing that data into a CRM. But interactive pieces seem to be a really good path to helping get more psychographic data and detailed data down to a user specificity. I wonder.
Yeah. It could also be the next step too in the process, right? So visual and static are funneling into something like chatbots or conversation, or that follow-up quiz or survey of whatever it might be. That could be something that is typically integrated on the email or funnel outreach side of things. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, compelling. So moving into original content, Corinne?
Yes. So, you know, I talked a little bit about original content, and so what the latest research being is that, so information content that is research driven, data driven, educational in nature, and essentially using that as a platform for a content marketing program. So here's an example from LinkedIn. And yes, it's LinkedIn, and yes, I'm sure they've got a really great and huge marketing budget, but this doesn't have to be expensive. And so looking at, they did a survey and a study to find out what and how people change, what makes them change jobs. Very compelling information, obviously, for HR departments. And so looking at their top of funnel, they created this video, which is what you see on the left-hand side, that they used as that top of funnel, that mobile ready, that mobile first piece that was able to then a short video, really interesting, using motion graphics. It's not long, it's not expensive to create. you can go to market quite quickly with these types of solutions and tools. Again, it's not very expensive now to create these, and you can actually find things and you can create them in-house quite effectively as well. But the bigger point being is that it was the lead in to convert over to their website, where they had their landing page, which contained this video, which had more information about the study, which then had the full conversion and the form to fill out, which then of course led to the original piece of content, which was that research study. And more we see, we know as marketers, especially sort of in the B2B world and in the tech world, we see people using the Forrester report or the Gartner report as their means of converting over. But very rarely do we see this sort of micro piece. We might see something, an advertisement or some sort of placement for it on a social network somewhere, or on somewhere on YouTube or Google or online, but rarely are we creating then this sort of original video piece that can actually be that mobile first, that sort of at that top of funnel. And so, this is just one example of original content, but then the other piece of this, the other opportunity that we really need to be looking more at is user-generated content. Now, this is user-generated content for good, not for evil, where it can go either way when you trust something like Facebook Live as your platform, because you can't control there's very little moderation you can do on there. It's a free-for-all. And so what we're seeing is more people, and as we talked about, these brands taking back their engagement platform and controlling and protecting their brands and protecting their message. And they're doing this to engage with their audience, and so they're promoting and fostering this platform, this engagement platform, where they're going to be able to sort of get these sort of examples and the word of mouth. They're moving from the wisdom of the crowd more into now word of mouth. And so this example, Ulta does a great job when they launch products, and in this case it was Sarah Jessica Parker launching her perfume brand, where she actually for an hour went live Q&A with this audience, and what it allowed them to do was moderate the different comments coming in and out, being able to take out things that were nasty or inappropriate, but it also provided a platform that other users could post up, as you can see on the right hand side, the user-generated content of other people posting up tweets and other user-generated content items, objects into the feed that later on became great additional promotional items that were then used subsequently in other content items. So there is sort of ripple effect with that, and we see that a lot when you take back control of your engagement platform.
Right. I love this example of event-based marketing used to then have content moderated and distributed and engaged with another portion of the audience. There's a product out there called Engage, which does some very similar stuff like this, where you can bring data feeds from multiple live events together, have people at the event sign up, use it, share content, moderate it, distribute it, and you've taken what could have been an event that might have been successful if a couple of hundred people been there, but now you've taken an event that had a couple of hundred people there, and it's been amplified out across the feeds in the audience that not only your brand but those couple of hundred other people also have. And it really amplifies that trust component you were just talking about in the prior slide.
Absolutely. Red Bull does a great job. They have their big event so many people could be at because it's very location centric. But then they post the videos online for their experiences with what happened, and it really becomes this community, this very engaged community that's hosted on their site, that they are able to control the message and they're able to moderate it with huge success. So, transferring over, so we've got the original content, the user-generated content, and of course, making it visual content. We live in this sort of this what we call snackable content, snackable message world, where we all have this squirrel complex of very little attention span. And so the more visually engaging we can make something, the better. But also and here's two examples of, we've got Spotify, who also did a research study in terms of playlists with some of their customers, and then put that out again, starting with the video, and then using that as their top of funnel to convert over, then bring people back over to their website and convert the journey. And then on the left-hand side, we've got the Dell event, which shows how they were able to create this engagement platform, leveraging video, as well as then having a moderation area for the user-generated content and feedback, where they were able to incorporate a social wall and have a lot more interactivity within that they would not normally have if it was just sort of that, just a standard webinar event where it's just the talking voice with very little interaction.
I remember watching that Dell event that was done similar like this, where as keynotes were given and products were talked about on the right-hand rail, moderated content was put forward that showed, that had more in-depth content or links to content, and I was able to see people sharing very specific URLs that, it made it very easy for the audience to take just what could have been purely consumable data from an attendance point of view and made it distributable data from an attendance activist point of view.
Just to let the two of you know, we're experiencing some audio problems. Using just a little bit and an echo. So we'll continue to do this, but we'll try to figure it out during the Q&A session.
Okay. So let's then move forward to some interactive content.
Well, and this is where the other opportunity for, especially for marketing strategy and content marketers, is in understanding not just did someone download the ebook or the brochure or the white paper, because yes, you can see that you'll get the stat, you'll get the session view of how long they were on your website, maybe how many page views they did, and yes, they downloaded that final asset. But what you're missing is, did they actually open it and look at it? And so one of the things that we see is that, yes, it's important to have some of these vanity metrics, but a good reason and to move over to more interactive style content is because you're going to find out the areas where people have actually engaged with it. So with the other example we gave with Sarah Jessica Parker, within that platform, you'll also be able to, you get things like where people hopped on, where people started really asking questions, where people were really engaged, and also where people dropped off. Likewise, with interactive content, having the ability to put up polls and other sort of engaging style content widgets that you can actually then get a much better idea of what's being effective, what's working, where people dropped off. And you also then are able to understand and glean a lot more about who your audience is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this measuring the impact is purely not just from a one piece of content kind of scenario. You want to look at a thing through the cume, right? So in this use case scenario, we had FedEx. It was a report written up on FedEx, their small business site, smallbusiness.fedex.com. Gartner did a report on the work that Ion Interactive did with them, and it showed how the site itself was plodding along and doing what it was supposed to be doing, but as they added the interactivity to solve a series of problems for their audience, the total traffic increased and the engagement with the audience increased. Not that the interactive piece ranked or outranked or suddenly did something better than the rest of the site. It just solved problems in a way that were better for the user's needs and made the overall substance of the smallbusiness.fedex site do better, right? And I'm just looking for a number here. It said 82% average increase in month-over-month revenue since the launch and the inclusion of that particular interactive component. That's some pretty substantial growth at that level.
I think it's worth mentioning that while we're talking about FedEx and LinkedIn and Sarah Jessica Parker, these same techniques and these same opportunities for interactivity, visual and mobile, are available for much lower level budget lines. And so there's a lot of really cost-effective tools and a lot of cost-effective ways of doing that that will have that same outcome and that same experience for the customer, for that audience. You don't have to be the FedEx of the world with a large marketing budget in order to get the same types of results and returns.
I agree. I think the smaller business or the localized business sometimes gets, they talk themselves out of believing that just because a major brand is doing it, they can't do it. And I think that solves itself when the localized or small player starts to pay attention to how can they provide the single voice solution that's best for their audience, and then let the other stuff sort itself out, right? All right, so we've got some key takeaways, and so you want me to narrate through some of these?
Take it away.
So more content is better than less, but too much content is not the name of the game, right? It used to be a world of, if you produce more content, you drowned out the voice and you became the winner because nobody else could hear anything else. But users have exponentially become smarter and better at filtering. You know, their BS filters have gone up significantly, and the platforms and tools that we communicate with do a really solid job of filtering that out, because they want you to be more engaged with the audience. They want you to be, they want the content to be more valuable to a specific goal that the user is looking to attend to. All right, and then I'll let you take the next one.
Right, and so going back to connecting with your customers and it being about them and not about this, you know, self-serving self-promotion. And so really looking at the buyer journey, so understanding who the buyer is, understanding the problem you solve, and guiding them through a buyer journey that really is an experience for them. One that is interactive, that's visual, that's mobile first, and really being able to encourage the participation throughout that journey as well, because that's where you're going to learn that much more about who they are, and you'll be able to also gain a lot more information in terms of, you know, the example being, sure, they downloaded your white paper. Did they actually read it? Did they actually get through it? You know, what is that next step in that journey for them? Yeah,
and I think, and it's good that the people that hung on towards the tail end stuck around for this portion of the conversation. It's not just the how do I rank immediately or what do I do. It's how do I mine the little piece of data from each engagement and then sew that back together again, right? The mechanisms of successful marketing occur from how do I listen and then create and distribute, but then after all that's done, how do I take the little pieces of data that are collected throughout my entire enterprise's world of consumer engagement and bring that back together to learn how do I speak to a certain person at this level? How do I speak to a person who's different, who's talking about this? How do I know that maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not the best time to put out my ad and I should be putting it out at 3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, there's all sorts of different ways you could spin that data around. And are you doing that? It's not just what your initial return is, it's where do you go with it from there, right? Okay. So I guess that brings us to Lauren to head up some of the Q&A questions.
Excellent. Thank you to both of you. And I'm very happy to see that we took care of the audio problem. We'll go ahead and blame that on the nor'easter. So yes, first question to come in from Rick asks, in terms of the example of the bank that uses schema, did you say that they get more bang for their content, but you said that they get more bang for the content, but didn't really go into if they're getting more conversions or not. Would you say that the goals of adding schema and other data would be more for the ranking and traffic perspective, or also helping with conversions, or both?
Well, they were already ranking very well for the keywords that they were targeting. Okay. The schema helped put a new presentation layer on that, which increased the click-through rate. There were new levels of unique users that clicked through to them that hadn't been exposed to their brand before. And as a result of that, as well as they've discovered that there were already existing users that started clicking on content of theirs that they didn't necessarily know. So for example, there might have been people that had a commercial account set up with them, but then started to find ways to, personal banking vehicles or things that help them with other financial needs for running a company or a commercial entity. So I'm not going to say it had much to do with increased rankings, but it had all to do more with how did they manage to create better engagement from out of the gate with new people that were finding them as a result of that, and then existing people that were finding new portions of their business. And then once they came in, they started really paying attention to these people. And as I talked about a moment ago, oh, this person came in from this particular piece of content that isn't really aligned to what they do business with us. That then triggered them to say the person in that secondary business line reach out to them with a very specific message, right? Or the person who was already doing business with them or supporting their business say, hey, are you float the idea, are you interested in private banking stuff as well, or retirement stuff? And it led to a lot of opening of conversations and realizing that the people they had could and would buy more stuff from them if they did a better job of understanding how they could buy, find that stuff. Makes sense? I hope that answers the question. That's the best I can answer that name dropping. Thanks.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And also, just to let everyone know, we will be releasing this webinar via video, publishing an update on Search Engine Journal with specific call outs of the webinar, and also offering the slides via SlideShare. So I got a lot of questions about that as well. Yes, this will exist in the archives of the interwebs for you to access in the future. And I'm sure we'll do a follow-up with some more information from ScribbleLive as well. Next question. We've talked a lot about video. We have a question is, can you discuss the best placement on a page for video to make sure that the page is crawled properly for SEO? But I'd like to add to that a little bit. There are some schools of thought that having that video directly at the top is helpful for time on site and engagement. Also, having that video at the end when someone's reading as a call to action is quite nice as well, to keep someone a little bit more engaged after they've read some initial info. From your experience, do you have any recommendations on video embed placement on web pages?
Yeah, yes and no. From an SEO standpoint, you want to make sure the embedding is as least intrusive to the overall code as you possibly can, right? From the best place to put it, I would always tend to think, as long as you are not being intrusive to crawlability, put it in the place where you've discovered your user base will engage with it the most. So definitely do A/B testing and multivariate testing to, figure out what the best conversion rate optimization is for placement on the site. CNN does a really cool thing when you look at their some of their pages through their mobile app, where there might be a video at the top, but as you're scrolling through the article, the video turns into a little postage stamp on the top, and it still plays, and you could read the article, the video still plays, or when you then scroll back up, the video then takes over the full screen. So however you can get the audience to engage with the depth and breadth of your content, in my world, wins the day after you've made the discovery and the analysis that says the placement of my video in the particular either application or web page does not hinder spiderability or crawlability.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%, Chris. I think it also depends on the purpose of that page. Is it your www homepage? Is it a landing site for a campaign? You know, the treatment depends on what the page is for, what the video is for, and making sure it's not going to either annoy your audience. There's nothing worse than when you're on your mobile device and you click on something and you have this loud blaring video that you can't figure out how to turn off and turn down, etc. I mean, it's just immediate, like, fall off the page. So, you know, there's the technical aspect, but there's also the usability and that user experience that really needs to be taken into account, depending on whether it's a landing page, a campaign page, or microsite, or your or some other online property.
Agree very much.
Excellent. Thank you for that insight. Okay. Are there any, now that there's so much news about Facebook and security concerns, some publishers are questioning, and with the update to the algorithm, as you mentioned before in the presentation, some publishers are questioning continuing to use Facebook as an effective channel to build targeted traffic. With Facebook off the table, or maybe not as important as it used to be from a traffic building perspective, are there any other channels that you recommend to drive that targeted traffic to increase views and potential customers from a content marketing perspective?
Right, good question, and one that I think we're still going to see the whole Cambridge Analytica and the apps that you have granted access to your site, and where those apps collect data and who they resell their data to. Like, some of it actually is, buyer beware, right? Like, you're the product at the end of the day, right? The platform is just the device, right? And Facebook has been able to make a very strong multi-billion-dollar industry out of collecting data and offering highly targeted information to advertisers to focus on people, right? I think we got a long way to go to figure out where that next new channel is. There probably will be some legalese occurring. Definitely look to see privacy statements changing and new control mechanisms being put in place. But like Facebook as a product is still a very strong product. There's nothing wrong with the root product, right? It's just some data was sold to a professor to do a study, and the professor then stole that data, and now there's this big thing coming out of it, right? So,
and I'll take it back to, it depends on who you're trying to reach. If you're a pharmaceutical and you have a new drug coming out and you're trying to reach doctors, the chances are Facebook may not be where you want, may not be your primary, social channel. There's a lot of research. If you're in financial services, millennials are not on Facebook. They really avoid. They're more the Instagram, Snapchat crowd. And so it's really understanding your target audience as well, really understanding their behavior. It's obviously YouTube and Facebook are always going to come up into that equation at some point. But now we've got privacy issues, we've got fake news issues and placement issues, we've got the lack of social trust, we have changing demographics and how they interact with all of these things. So it really is about understanding it, not just your audience, but where are they to begin with.
Right, platform selection.
And I think a lot of it has to do with, that just reinforces the investment in the core, right? So your site is your site and your properties are your properties, and continue to invest in creating content that you own, that's hosted on your property, and not digital sharecropping. That's what the folks at Copyblogger call it. So basically, when you're investing in creating content specifically to be hosted on Facebook, you don't own that content, nor do you own the property that it's hosted on. That can go away at any time, and we've seen this happen over the years. Dig used to be a big traffic generator. Reddit used to. Facebook used to. So what's the next one? We don't know. But we do know that as long as you have that content and that core on the site, you can find where your audience migrates to. So it's a question of really following them along that path and making sure that you have the type of content that can relate to the audience when they're in that platform or when they're on the different medium. So the message is still the same, but it's just the medium that they're on and the way they process it. You know, Instagram and Snap, I believe, are doing more with directing traffic back to websites. The ability to link or have some kind of way to cross that bridge. So again, something to consider and to
it's funny to bring that up. I was gonna note that is that for a long time it was you got to create a website, and how does your offline product drive people to your website, and then how does your website drive people to your offline product, right? And then as platforms or communities of sorts came out, and the communities then started ratcheting down what you could or could not put in a thing, so they can control everything within their garden, right? Now we're seeing what you just talked about, Lauren, where there are communities that are opening that up and making it more brand friendly in the sense of being able to control how you publish data or allow their users to then traffic from the platform site back to your website in a more friendly, easier way.
Absolutely. I just realized that we are out of time. So we've hit the 12 o'clock mark here on the Pacific Standard Time area. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Sorry, we went a little bit over. We had a lot of great questions come in, so we'll be giving those to Corinne and Chris to be able to answer. And any that they can answer, we can send out in our recap, which will be featuring on the site in your emails as well, for those of you that have registered for the webinar, and also on YouTube and SlideShare and LinkedIn and all of those places that can drive traffic and awareness back to ScribbleLive's site. Like,
awesome.
Yay! How meta is that? It's a live content strategy in the making. So thanks everyone for attending. Be sure to subscribe to Search Engine Nerds, the podcast that we at SEJ produce on a bi-weekly basis. We'll have more information on content marketing, SEO, and everything there as well for your listening pleasure. And when the webinar is over, we're going to be issuing a quick survey. So if you could take the time just to fill that out, give us some feedback, it will help us make things better and optimize what we're doing good already. So thanks again, Chris and Corinne. Really appreciated you taking the time and sharing all of this with our audience. And get ready to have some questions, some amazing questions sent to your email boxes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.